Hey everyone, Alan Brochstein of New Cannabis Ventures and 420 Investor here to give you a taste of what happened last week and to share a little bit of insight as well. It was a good week, second week in a row of the market rallying about 7.5%. So far in February, we're up over 8%, and this could be the first month in the last 12 that we rally. Long overdue. The volumes picked up. It's really hard to tell exactly what's driving it, honestly. People are asking me, is the bottom in? And I'm talking about letters like U and V shape, and not really sure. I don't have a great answer for that yet, but enjoy it while we can, right? And I'll get back to that more in just a moment. But I have to say, it's the first month of the year. The news flow was really light. I do think that our market was really correlated to what was going on in the broad market. And what was interesting about this week was it was the second week in a row with I think, some interesting news. The news flows picked up, but more importantly, while the broad market struggled this week, our advance continued. And I know a lot of people focus on just one part of the market, like maybe the MSOs or maybe some other part. But the rally is pretty broad, which I'll talk about more later. So each of our weekly newsletters that we send out on Sunday has the best of our curated press releases, of which there were 4 this week, and also all of our exclusive news during the week. There were also 4 that made it into the newsletter. So hitting those curated press releases first, and those tend to be around capital raises, financial reporting, and M&A. 2 weeks ago, we had some important M&A, none this week. I didn't include it in actually, there was a lot of news this week that didn't either get published because MedMen didn't put out an earnings report. That's a whole nother story. Or, Gold Flora did what I think is probably a pretty big deal in California, but they didn't put a price on it. So we published it, but I'm not including it in our highlights. But there were 2 financial reports. The 2 largest Canadian LPs, maybe Hexa will be there eventually once they report everything. But the 2 largest Canadian LPs by revenue are Canopy Growth and Aurora. They both reported since they're not on a December year-end. Canopy Growth reported their fiscal Q3, their year-ends in March, and I would characterize it as they met their expectations. How they met their expectations was they did a little bit better than expected with their BioSteel in the U.S., but at the same time, their cannabis sales were a little bit worse than expected, and they declined pretty badly, especially in adult use, but it was pretty nasty across the board. I had been concerned that they might not report the German C3 sales since they sold that operation in January, but they were included. So that's going to be a little bit of a headwind going forward. That's about 10%, maybe a little bit less, by 8% of their revenue, and that was profitable business. So just as an aside, and I don't talk a lot about what I think about stocks, but I'm pretty out there on Canopy Growth, and I'm out there not because I don't like Canopy Growth or have any axe to grind, but I do feel like a lot of investors are making a huge mistake with certain names, including that one, in thinking that that's a good way to invest in cannabis. And I mean, it's not a secret. I don't think it is. I was interviewed this week by TD Ameritrade, and I shared publicly what I've been stating privately with my subscribers at 420 Investor. When I look out, Canopy Growth a year from now, in my opinion, is worth about $5 Canadian or $4 US. At the same time, I told my 420 Investor subscribers that doesn't mean it's going there tomorrow, and it could bounce. It's definitely very oversold, and I use the term overextended. So going into that number, it was pretty much priced for disappointment, and there was no disappointment per se. So anyway, that was one. And then the other one was Aurora. Again, they pretty much met the expectations. Now, they did that by having stronger than expected sales into Israel, which is very profitable business. So the analysts didn't seem too happy, I have to say, reading the reports on that one. So Aurora, if you're not following, they've pretty much given up on adult use. They're really about the international market in medical cannabis. So in the adult use market, they're mainly focused on premium flower. Other press releases, this one blew me away. Some of you may remember a company called Cerna. They changed their name to CEA, that stands for Controlled Environment Agriculture, CEA Industries. And so their new symbol was CEAD. It's like dead, except with a C in front of it. And I was watching this play out. They filed with the NASDAQ to uplist. Of course, to do that, they had to do a reverse split, which they did, 150 to 1. And they were able to price a $24 million unit offering as they uplisted to the NASDAQ at $4.13. If you do the math, that's like 2 3/4 cents old school Cerna. And that's pretty much an all-time low. And here was the kicker. The units, which were priced at $4.13, had warrants that weren't too far above that. And so I think the reason why the stock dropped so much and it's trading way below that offering price was that basically, arbitrageurs bought that deal and just immediately sold the stock at whatever price they could get just to keep those valuable warrants. Kind of crazy. It's a Hail Mary by the company, and it's very similar to what happened with a company called Pharmacyte Biotech, although I have to say Cerna or CEA Industries is a much more substantive company in my opinion. And so we saw PMC Biotech go public, and their stock went down also after that capital raise. It's the same story. And in fact, we saw another deal. This company was already public, and it's not really a cannabis company. It's a synthetic cannabinoid company called Inveric Biosciences. They do other things as well. And they priced a deal on the NASDAQ. They're already at risk of being delisted, but they priced it I think that it had closed around 65 cents. They priced it at 50 cents with 55-cent warrants, and the stock dropped into the 30s. So, wow. All right, so that was the CEA news, and I gave you a little extra there. And then also on the capital raising front was Harborside closed the first portion of their $77 million total debt with Polaris. The way they closed it, since it's ahead of the transaction, it was actually split into 3 and shared with the other 2 parties, Urban Leaf and Loudpack. So again, what we're seeing in the cannabis industry, and it's a huge story, a huge positive in my opinion, is because it was evidence here, they canceled their equity raise. What we're seeing is the ability of companies to raise capital without selling equity, whether it's through sale leasebacks or debt. And of course, this isn't free money. It raises the risk profile, things like that. But I think people have been concerned that we may see capital raises. And when I look at the cannabis industry, which I've been following for 8 years, it's never been in better shape. I mean, number one, the federal government doesn't have a gun pointed at its head, so that's always nice. Number two, a lot of companies are cash flow positive now. And number three, we are seeing expanded access to capital. And so happy days. All right, so we also run our own exclusive content, and that content tends to be around our interviews, around our revenue tracker updates, around our index updates, and then state or even country market updates. Sometimes there's other types of content as well. So looking at our exclusive content, in our interviews this week, Carrie took a California approach and interviewed 2 California companies. One was private, it's Garden Society, and we had interviewed them, I believe, 2.5, maybe 3 years ago, and they've really pivoted. It's kind of interesting to see about the business model. Again, we do a write-up, but you can also listen to the whole interview. But this is a female-owned or majority-owned company in California. It's a brand looking to expand into other states, and it should be interesting. Really good people, if you ask me, from what I've observed in the past, and would reiterate after listening to the interview. And then the other interview was with publicly traded Glass House, and we had interviewed Kyle Kazan 6 months ago. Things have changed for the company. The 2 things top of mind for me is the litigation revolving around the acquisition they were supposed to do that would have greatly expanded their retail. And then, of course, they were able to get financing and close as well the large greenhouse. And Kyle put some numbers out there, dates out there about when they expect to get licensed, when their first harvest will take place. And it's a little bit sooner than I thought. So we'll see on that. But those are the two interviews that we ran. And then in terms of the other type of content, both of them were around individual market updates. And I didn't do one, or I have not ever done one for Massachusetts, but but it's the same story, unfortunately. And both Illinois and Michigan, which had banner Decembers, record-setting Decembers in adult use, had horrible Januaries. And so it kind of begs the question, what happened in December? What happened in January? Why these massive changes from month to month? Both months have 31 days. I always say sometimes there's seasonals that we may not fully appreciate yet, given the newness of these programs. But I think an overarching issue is Omicron. And I think in December, we were all excited about that big jump in cannabis consumption, but a big portion of that may be related to more people staying at home. So flashback to 2020, right? So unfortunately, Illinois sales fell 15% in January from December. And of course, February with shorter days sequentially is going to be tough. We'll look to see what the year-over-year growth rate was. I believe it was 21% in January. So we'll see that's the lowest it's ever been, and we'll see how February shakes out. One other point there, we are seeing fewer out-of-state purchasers. That's really a big factor. 2 months in a row, we've seen declines in out-of-state purchasing as a percentage, and actually this month, absolutely, of course. And then the other one's Michigan, where the story may be a little bit more complex. The sales there fell 9% sequentially. I believe they were up over 40% from a year ago. It's a little bit different market. It wasn't quite as they didn't have their medical market. It was kind of like California. It got shut down and reopened about the same time as adult use. And so this is a market that went live without really being fully supported. Illinois was better than that. They had a lot of medical stores already open. It wasn't fully there yet. And so we're still seeing more growth in general in Michigan. So it fell less, 9%, and grew more, 40 or 41%. But there, just a stunning decline in flower prices. And this is something I share every month. And this was the biggest drop ever year over year, I believe 52%, 17% 1 month decline in adult use flower prices. So the prices are still kind of high, but they're coming down as more supply comes on. So that was really it for the news. And then each week we try to share some insight and perspective. That's how we wrap up the newsletter, or actually we begin it that way. And this week, I hope I'm not jinxing things, and I'm certainly not one to say that 2 weeks makes a bull market for sure. That's not the case. But I did want to point out, so 2 weeks ago, we talked about, the investors, what they need to do if the market conditions stayed as bad as they were in the first 4 weeks of the year. And we shared a graphic there just showing how much cannabis stocks had declined and compared it to other things like Tesla, biotech, Bitcoin, things like that. And at the time, cannabis stocks were a little bit towards the bottom of the pack, but pretty much in line. And, I thought at the time that what was going on was mainly this whole market meltdown thing and less to do with cannabis. And I'm glad to say over the past 2 weeks, cannabis stocks have led the way. In fact, of all those different asset classes or sectors, whatever you want to call them, year to date now, cannabis down 5.7% as measured by the Global Cannabis Stock Index is leading the way. It's the best index. And so in this piece, we kind of broke it down. And I think the really good news is it's not just one thing driving it. It's really a broad rally. Too early to say if it's sustainable, by the way, but nice to see the breadth there. And the biggest factor is what's going on in the MSOs. And of course, over the past 2 weeks, a couple things have happened. Number one, the Verano Goodness Growth Index seems to have acquisition, it seems to have sparked some interest in the market, and especially in smaller companies. We've seen some meteoric rises, and so that's one thing. And I think also 3 weeks ago we had highlighted some concern that we thought was misplaced about what was going on with the big ETF MSOS. They had, over the prior couple of months, received a lot of inflows, but they had finally invested, and they were patient to invest in. All the cash was gone. And I saw on Twitter people were freaking out, oh no, there's no one left to buy the MSOs. Of course, that proved to be very fallacious, right? And so over the past 2 weeks, we've actually seen some new large inflows, and we talked about that. So all in all, we wrapped up the piece by just talking about, part of this rally may be political related, and I don't know how sustainable that is. I'm still of the view that anything that's going to happen on the federal front is going to take a long time to play out, and it may encourage optimism or all that, but 280E is not going away on July 1st, and we're not uplisting July 1st either, probably. And oh, by the way, if these things change, you know who's going to get on board very quickly with the idea that we could have an incredible rally just because of that. But I'm not going to be a pumper and tell people this is going to happen. No, instead we talked about a few other factors that are more meaningful in terms of what might happen in the near term with especially with the American cannabis stocks. And I'll let you read the piece to dig into that. But suffice it to say, I'm hopeful that the bottom's in. I did talk with my 420 investor subscribers about historically most of the tops and many of the bottoms have been V-shaped, meaning we hit a low and then it's off to the races, or we hit the high like in October of 18 in Canada, and then it's downhill thereafter. So sometimes they're U-shaped, and this may be, especially with what's going on in the broad market, if that type of pressure remains, it may be hard for our sector to just blast off when everybody's all afraid of interest rates and Putin and this and that. So maybe it'll be U-shaped. Maybe it won't be at all, sadly. But for now, 2 weeks into a 4-week month, we are up, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed that not only will this be the first up month in a year, but maybe this will be the first up quarter in more than a year as well. So with that, I'm going to sign off and wish everybody a happy Valentine's Day. Take care.